The deadly standoff inside Attica Prison, the real story behind the 1971 uprising. Smash that subscribe button if you think you can handle the truth, because what happened inside these walls still haunts America. September 9th, 1971. A thick fog hung over the cold stone walls of Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York. The prison was a fortress, gray, massive, and isolated, surrounded by farmland and barbed wire. Inside, tension brewed like a ticking time bomb. For months, whispers echoed in the cell blocks. The prisoners, mostly Black and Latino men, spoke of endless brutality, spoiled food, broken toilets, no medical care, and the constant sting of racial humiliation. Attica ain't just a prison, one inmate told a reporter years later. It was a pressure cooker, and we were about to blow. That morning, in cell block A, an argument erupted between two inmates and a guard. It started small, about male privileges, but when one of the prisoners was struck, something snapped. In seconds, hundreds of men surged forward. Keys were stolen. Doors flew open. The sound of metal on metal filled the air like thunder. The Attica Uprising had begun. Prisoners flooded the corridors, overpowering guards, seizing control of several cell blocks. Sirens wailed. Tear gas canisters hissed. Smoke crawled across the yard as men shouted for unity, waving ripped bedsheets as banners. Inmates who had never spoken to each other before now stood side by side, shouting a single word that echoed through the concrete: power. By noon, the prison was under inmate control, except for one area, D Yard. That's where nearly 200 men gathered. They dragged mattresses, tables, and metal sheets to form barricades. Some guards were taken hostage, shielded, terrified, but alive. The prisoners made it clear: we don't want to kill. We want to be treated like human beings. Outside the walls, and then a chilling message arrived from Albany. Governor Nelson Rockefeller, pressured by law enforcement and politics, had refused to visit Attica or negotiate personally. His words were brief, cold: retake the prison by force if necessary. Inside the yard, word spread quickly. Some prisoners prayed, others sharpened makeshift shields, and the hostages, terrified but hopeful, looked at the faces of their captors and asked, "Will they come for us?" Barkley looked at them with eyes heavy from sleepless nights and said softly, "They're coming for all of us." By dawn, helicopters began circling again, closer, louder. The sun rose blood orange through the fog, and a single command was heard from a loudspeaker outside the prison walls: "This is your last chance to surrender." Inside the yard, hundreds of men stood silent, unarmed, clutching their signs, chanting one last time for freedom. And then came the sound that froze every heartbeat: the metallic click of rifles being loaded. The men at the gates stared at the sky, realizing what was about to happen. But before the first shot was fired, a voice echoed from somewhere near the barricades. A guard, one of the hostages, shouting desperately, "Don't do it! There are innocent people in here!" The chaos that followed would become one of the darkest moments in American prison history. Before we go deeper into this nightmare, hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next inside Attica Prison was so shocking, it changed how America saw justice forever. September 13th, 1971, Day 4 of the Attica Prison Uprising. The fog that morning was unusually thick, clinging to the barbed wire like cobwebs. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades slicing through the dawn silence. On the ground, over 500 state troopers and corrections officers surrounded the prison. They were armed with shotguns, rifles, and BBU. When the gas cleared, the ground was slick with mud and confusion. Over 2,000 rounds had been fired in less than 15 minutes. Bodies lay scattered across the yard. Dozens were wounded. 39 men were dead, including 10 hostages and 29 inmates. The world was about to learn that the government's retaking of Attica had turned into one of the deadliest prison confrontations in U.S. history. But at that moment, inside those walls, all anyone knew was chaos. Survivors described the aftermath as surreal. Men staggered through smoke and gunpowder, coughing, eyes red, calling for help. A few guards still alive cried out for medics, while others just stared blankly, unable to process what had happened. The troopers moved through the yard shouting, "Lie down! Face down!" as they handcuffed everyone they could find, inmates and injured alike. Many of the hostages who had survived the gas attack were barely conscious. Some of the rescuers, realizing the scale of what had just happened, looked physically ill. Outside the walls, reporters gathered by the hundreds, waiting for word. No one knew the truth yet. Not the families, not the public, not even the governor's office. The official statement at first claimed that the hostages had been killed by inmates during the rebellion. But as coroners examined the bodies later, the truth came out. Every hostage had been killed by law enforcement gunfire. The state had fired blindly into a yard full of their own men. When that fact reached the press, outrage exploded across America. Television networks cut into programming to broadcast the news. Photographs of the dead and wounded filled front pages. Civil rights groups condemned the operation as a massacre, not a rescue. Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who had refused to enter negotiations or step foot in Attica during the crisis, appeared on camera days later, unposed but detached. When asked whether he regretted authorizing the retaking, he simply said, "It was necessary to restore order." But order came at a terrible cost. Behind the walls, prisoners who had survived were beaten and interrogated. Many described days of retaliation that followed the uprising. Stripped, forced to crawl through corridors, and left without food or medical care. Independent observers called what they saw a human rights nightmare. Among the dead was Elliot L.D. Barkley, the young inmate who had become the voice of the rebellion. Witnesses said he had been standing with his hands up when he was shot. His death became a symbol of hope destroyed, of leadership silenced. In New York City, protests erupted. People marched with signs reading, "Attica means fight back." Activists and politicians demanded investigations, calling the government's response barbaric. For many Americans, Attica became the moment when the system's cruelty could no longer be ignored. But inside the prison, the survivors, inmates and hostages alike, lived with trauma that would never fade. Some guards later spoke publicly, saying they had begged the state not to use force. Others described survivors' guilt that haunted them for decades. In the months that followed, official inquiries were launched, lawsuits filed, and public hearings held. Testimonies revealed not just what had happened during those 4 days, but what had led to them. Years of abuse, racism, and neglect that had turned Attica into a powder keg waiting to explode. By the end of 1972, more than $12 million in claims were filed against the state. Investigations uncovered evidence of excessive force and cover-ups. Still, not one official faced criminal charges for the retaking. Attica had become more than a place. It had become a warning, a word that still echoed through American politics. Hip-hop lyrics and protest chants for decades to come. But the story wasn't over yet, because what happened after the massacre, the cover-ups, the trials, and the haunting truth that emerged from behind those prison walls would reveal just how far the system would go to protect itself. The Attica Uprising wasn't just a tragedy. It was the birth of a movement, one that would forever redefine the fight for justice in America. If you're still watching, hit subscribe, because the secrets that came out after the Attica massacre will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice in America. The yard at Attica Correctional Facility was quiet again, but not in peace. The blood had been washed away, the bodies removed, and the fences repaired. But the echoes of that September morning lingered in every corridor, every cell, every whisper between guards and inmates. What had happened at Attica was no longer just a prison riot. It had become a national wound. In the days that followed the retaking, officials moved quickly to control the narrative. Press conferences were held, statements were made. Governor Nelson Rockefeller praised the courage of the officers who had restored order. He called the operation necessary and disciplined. But in truth, the retaking of Attica had been chaos, and soon the evidence would prove it. Autopsies began revealing the first cracks in the official story. Contrary to the state's initial claims that hostages had been killed by prisoners, coroners found every single hostage had died from police gunfire. The bullets didn't come from inmates. They came from the state. When that truth reached the public, outrage spread across the country. Newspapers that had once sided with the state changed their tone overnight. The New York Times, Washington Post, and even small-town dailies began asking the same question. Why did the state open fire? The more investigators dug, the more horrifying the picture became. Survivors, inmates and hostages alike, described an aftermath drenched in revenge. Troopers and correctional officers stormed through the prison after the shooting, beating survivors, forcing them to crawl naked through corridors, threatening them with execution. Medical teams were barred from treating the wounded. It was a deliberate act of vengeance, the kind that left scars on the soul, not just the body. Among the survivors was Frank Big Black Smith, a prisoner who had become one of the Uprising's leaders. He later testified that after the retaking, he was stripped naked, beaten, and forced to lie on a table for hours while guards threatened to cut him. His story became one of the most disturbing symbols of what the state wanted buried. Outside Attica, the fight for truth began. Civil rights lawyers, journalists, and activists descended on the prison, demanding access, demanding accountability. The state stonewalled at every turn. Governor Rockefeller refused to testify before an investigative panel. The official state report, known as the McKay Commission, acknowledged excessive force but stopped short of blaming anyone by name. It called the retaking tragic but necessary. But the people weren't satisfied with bureaucratic words. Public pressure grew for justice. Lawsuits piled up. Survivors spoke at rallies, showing the world their scars, physical and emotional. They described the hunger, the beatings, the tear gas, the fear. For the first time, Americans who had never thought about prison began to see it as something more than punishment. They saw it as a system, cold, racist, and broken. By 1974, a special prosecutor had been appointed to investigate Attica. For years, witnesses were questioned, evidence reviewed, photographs re-examined. But when the case reached courtrooms, the truth collided with power. Out of more than 60 state officials and officers investigated, only one faced criminal charges. And even he was acquitted. Not a single trooper was convicted for the killings at Attica. Instead, inmates were the ones charged, accused of rioting, kidnapping, and assault. For them, Attica's punishment didn't end when the gunfire stopped. It followed them through every appeal, every parole hearing, every new prison they were sent to. Years passed, and yet the pain didn't fade. Families of the hostages, guards who had died in the retaking, began speaking out too. They had been told for years that prisoners had killed their loved ones. When they learned the truth, that the bullets had come from state guns, they felt betrayed. "They lied to us," one widow told reporters. "They lied to everyone." It would take decades for justice, even in symbolic form, to arrive. In 2000, nearly 30 years after the uprising, the state of New York finally agreed to a $12 million settlement to the surviving inmates and families of those killed. It was not an admission of guilt, but it was, at least, an acknowledgement. "Money can't heal what was done," one survivor said, "but at least they had to say our names." Over time, Attica became more than a place. It became a word that lived in protest chants, documentaries, music, and film. When people shouted, "Attica," in marches or songs, they weren't just invoking a prison. They were invoking resistance. For many Americans, the Attica Uprising forced a reckoning, a look at what happens when justice breaks down from within. The incident led to reforms across the country, improved prison conditions, oversight boards, and new policies about negotiation in crisis situations. But it also left a question that still hangs in the air. Why does it take tragedy for change to happen? Even today, more than 50 years later, former inmates and guards reunite occasionally to speak about what happened, not to reopen wounds, but to remind the world that those days were irreal. Attica wasn't about hate, one survivor said. It was about dignity. We wanted to be treated like men. That's the haunting truth of Attica. It was never just about prisoners and guards. It was about America itself. About what happens when those in power forget that humanity doesn't stop at the prison gate. In the years that followed, artists, writers, and filmmakers kept the story alive. The 1974 documentary Attica and the 2021 re-examination by Stanley Nelson brought the uprising back into public consciousness, forcing new generations to confront an old truth. And the legacy of Attica reached beyond the prison walls. It influenced movements for civil rights, prison reform, and even police accountability. Every chant, every protest, every demand for justice that echoed the words, "We are men, not beasts," carried a piece of Attica within it. Today, the old prison still stands, its walls taller than ever, its yard quiet. But those who pass by say that on misty mornings, you can still feel it, the weight of what happened there, the cries for freedom, the shouts for dignity, the pain of betrayal. Attica remains a scar on America's conscience, and a lesson written in stone. When people are denied humanity long enough, they will rise to claim it, even if it costs them everything. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for what's next. Subscribe, because the next case we uncover will make you question how much justice really costs.